Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the delightfully tangled, occasionally tragic, and definitely inbred lives of some of the most genetically compromised women in medieval royalty. These weren't just your garden variety princesses. They were born to cousins, married off to uncles, and in a few eyebrow-raising cases to men who checked both boxes. It was all part of the regal pastime of keeping both power and chromosomes strictly in the family. But before we descend into this twisted tapestry of dynastic DNA, go ahead and hit like and subscribe only if you actually enjoy the strange historical rabbit holes we explore here. And drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It always amazes me to see how far this strange little historical caravan reaches. Now dim those lights, maybe flick on a fan for some ambient hum, and let's sink into the strange story of Juana of Castile, born in 1479, the third child of two people who were both politically powerful and uncomfortably related. Her parents, the legendary Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, aka the same royal duo who bankrolled Columbus, expelled the Moors, and still thought cousin marriage was peak geopolitical strategy. Juana came from the Trastamara dynasty, a bloodline so into intermarriage it made European royalty look like a DNA knot. By the time she arrived, the gene pool had just enough diversity to technically qualify as alive, but not enough to avoid the usual suspects' unstable moods, deep melancholia, and that classic Habsburg chin. In her teens, Juana was shipped off to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, a title that oversold the product. He was, of course, her cousin. Because why break tradition now? The Habsburgs, after all, had two hobbies: accumulating crowns and ignoring basic genetic advice. At first, things were promised. Juana was smart, charismatic, and apparently head over heels in love with Philip. Philip, on the other hand, was in love with everyone who wasn't Juana. Her passionate nature and, let's say, low tolerance for cheating didn't mesh well with a court that preferred their marriages cold and their affairs lukewarm. When Philip died, supposedly of typhoid, though divine karma remains on the suspect list, Juana didn't handle it gracefully. She refused to part with his corpse. Literally. She had his coffin paraded around Spain with her, and would occasionally open it up to check on him. Romantic, maybe. Disturbing, also maybe. Her political enemies pounced on this. Her father, Ferdinand, claimed it proved she was unfit to rule. Her son Charles, later Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, agreed. And conveniently, both men stepped in to govern while Juana was tucked away in a convent for most of her adult life. Was she truly mad? Historians still argue. Some say she suffered from actual mental illness made worse by grief and isolation. Others believe she was simply a politically inconvenient woman with a backbone which in the 16th century was just as dangerous. Either way, Juana wasn't just some tragic, lovesick figure. She was a cocktail of royal pressure, dynastic inbreeding, and the medieval world's least healthy coping mechanisms. Now, if genetic inevitability were a competition, Maria Anna of Spain would be up there polishing her trophy while her son gnawed on the corner. Born in 1634, she was the child of Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, who naturally were first cousins. Because why ease off now, true to Habsburg form, Maria Anna married her uncle not twice removed or distant enough to be polite, but her actual immediate uncle, Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor. When your family tree resembles a wreath, that kind of decision makes a twisted kind of sense. To her credit, Maria Anna was intelligent, pious, multilingual, and truly kind. She brought grace and composure to the imperial court, along with chromosomes that had been photocopied one too many times. Her greatest contribution to history, giving birth to Charles II of Spain, possibly the most inbred monarch ever to wear a crown without falling off it. Charles was a walking checklist of genetic red flags, oversized jaw, soft chin, constant illness, and developmental delays. He struggles to eat, speak, or function independently, less endearing when you're running a global empire. Was any of this Maria Anna's fault? Not at all. She didn't invent the Habsburg marriage playbook, but she did help execute it to perfection. To her credit, she loved her son fiercely, protected him against court politics, and ruled as regent during his childhood. Trying to shield Charles from court intrigue was like trying to referee a food fight among starving nobles wielding knives. She died in 1696, just a year after her son. Her legacy, a fading empire on the verge of collapse and a war, the War of Spanish Succession, all because Charles predictably couldn't produce an heir. Genetics 1, Empire 0. If you've ever wondered what happens when a family uses marriage like an Excel formula, let me introduce you to Isabella of Habsburg. Born in 1501, daughter of Yes Again, Philip the Handsome, and Juana of Castile, aka Joanna the Mad, or more generously, Joanna the Justifiably Overwhelmed. Isabella was the sister of Emperor Charles V, niece to half of Europe, and genetically speaking, a family recipe gone through too many print cycles, a base of Habsburg, a pinch of Trastamara, and no new ingredients. At 17, Isabella married Christian II of Denmark, a reform-minded monarch with a complicated resume, and became Queen of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. But that story, my friends, is for another night. Attempts erratic behavior and the aura of a man just one bad breakfast away from waging war on the furniture. Their union predictably was both diplomatically strategic and personally awkward. Naturally, Isabella and Christian were cousins because at this point, Habsburg matchmaking was less about romance and more about rotational symmetry. But what truly sealed the genetic fate was Isabella's bloodline, a looping, self-repeating medieval screensaver of noble DNA. She was expected to bring charm, grace, and maybe even disguise the fact that her family tree had stopped branching generations ago. Life in the Danish court, however, was more a cautionary tale than a fairy tale. Christian's reign crumbled. He was overthrown, exiled, and imprisoned, essentially ticking every bad husband box short of was actually a goat in disguise. Isabella followed him into exile, true love, or maybe just hereditary persistence. Her health declined amid the stress of dysfunction, royal and exile, and she died tragically young at 24, possible complications of childbirth, or simply from being a medieval woman married to a disaster. Their children, undeterred by centuries of genetic déjà vu, carried on the noble pastime of familial matchmaking. One daughter, Dorothea, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, because when it comes to the Habsburgs, the only thing better than marrying a cousin is making sure the family reunion doubles as speed dating. Then there's Eleanor of Austria, born in 1498, historically wedged between Renaissance idealism and relentless royal obligation. Daughter of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile, She was the elder sister of Emperor Charles V and owner of deluxe full-bodied Habsburg DNA. Her youth was a parade of diplomatist limbo and postponed weddings. At one point, she was even promised to Henry VIII of England until the match fell apart. Lucky break. Dodging Henry might be the only known example of Habsburg inbreeding working in someone's favor. Instead, Eleanor married Manuel I of Portugal, a much older man who also happened to be her first cousin, once removed. Basically, the noble version of marrying someone you bump into at every family dinner. She became Queen of Portugal, had 2 children, and was widowed before 30. The solution: remarry. This time to Francis V of France, a man who had previously been imprisoned by her brother. Ah, diplomacy, where nothing says I forgive you like marrying your jailer's sister. Francis wasn't exactly smitten. He saw Eleanor more as a political package with a Habsburg return address. Their marriage was childless and tepid. He preferred his mistresses. She preferred her books and prayers. Yet through it all, Eleanor remained loyal to her Habsburg roots. You can't blame her. Sure, the dynasty was inbred, but it was at least predictably inbred. Eleanor outlived both husbands, faded into quiet dignity, and died in 1558. She left no scandals, no wars, and no direct heirs, just the serenity distinction of surviving 2 royal marriages without drama, which in Habsburg terms is basically sainthood. Catherine of Aragon, born 1485, came from Spain's top power couple and part-time genetic echo chamber, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. With the blood of 2 united kingdoms and the genetic depth of a kiddie pool, she was betrothed to Arthur, Prince of Wales, at the age of 3. Naturally, they were second cousins, and in the royal world, that's barely even related. They married in 1501. Arthur died 5 months later. Did they consummate the marriage? That question will later explode into one of history's messiest religious divorces and cost England its Catholic identity. Catherine, now a teenage widow, was trapped in royal limbo, no husband, no refund, and no plan B. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother. The second marriage wasn't unheard of, especially for the Trastamaras, who liked to recycle everything, including spouses. Catherine brought grace, intelligence, and political savvy. She gave Henry 5 suppressed, but only Mary survived later, Mary I. Henry, however, wanted a son. Catherine couldn't provide one. Cue catastrophic ego eruption. Henry claimed their marriage was invalid because she had yin with his brother. Catherine, backed by the Pope, said otherwise. What followed was less a divorce and more a full-blown ecclesiastical meltdown. Henry launched the English Reformation just to get out of it. Catherine was banished, stripped of her title, and lived her final years in isolation, insisting until death that she was the rightful queen. She may have had blue blood, but it was dangerously concentrated. Her legacy: she changed history not with armies, but by reminding everyone why marrying your cousin might not be the best long-term strategy. Margaret of Austria, born in 1480, was the only daughter of Emperor Maximilian and Mary of Burgundy. As a lifelong Habsburg, her family tree had more loops than logic. At age 3, she was betrothed to Charles V of France, but he dumped her for Anne of Brittany, who came with better real estate. Margaret, ever poised, famously declared, "I shall be revenged." and she was by becoming one of Europe's most competent female rulers. Her second marriage, to Juan of Castile, son of Ferdinand and Isabella, aka her cousin. He died young, and Margaret, still under 20, had now been rejected twice, once by choice, once by death. She enough decided was enough. No more royal roulette. She never remarried. Instead, Margaret ran the Netherlands as governor for her nephew, Charles V. She was sharp diplomat and quietly powerful, a woman trusted with statecraft because she wasn't busy producing questionable heirs. She negotiated treaties, soothed revolts, and still found time to patronize art and music. Margaret died in 1530 after a minor foot injury went medieval-level fatal. She remains one of the few Habsburg women remembered more for policy than pedigree. Although, of course, the pedigree was still as knotted as ever. Then there's Blanche of Castile, born in 1188, back when cousin marriage was still considered prestige. A granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, and daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile, Blanche was royalty squared. She married Louis VIII of France, her cousin, not a distant one either. More like, hey, I share your jawline, cousin. At 12, Blanche was shipped to France to get married. Louis's father, Philip II, remarked, "She is small, but she will grow charming," a creepy compliment, even by medieval standards. As queen consort, then regent, Blanche was a political force. After Louis's death, she ruled as regent for her son Louis IX, later Saint Louis. She organized crusades, crushed noble uprisings, and imposed order with a velvet glove over an iron will. Genetically, Blanche was the product of English, Castilian, and French royalty stirred into one potent cocktail. Her DNA probably needed its own warning label. But she ruled with wisdom and tenacity, proving that behind every saintly king was a queen who did all the actual work. Finally, we meet Anne of Bohemia and Hungary, born in 1503, an heir to 2 thrones and a walking family reunion. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia and Anne of Foix-Candale, who sounded promised until you realized she too had noble genes, arranged like a family spreadsheet. At 18, Anne married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, a union so genetically close, it made normally inbreeding look distant. Double first cousin. That means they share both sets of grandparents, basically genetic copy-paste, but political a masterstroke. Their marriage united Habsburg claims and reinforced dynastic dominance alongside whatever silent mutations came along for the ride, with the crowns of Hungary and Bohemia. And if you're going to consolidate royal bloodlines, why stop at symbolic power? Anne and Ferdinand had 15 children. Yes, 15. Because if you're going to collapse the genetic diversity of a continent, you might as well commit. Anne was described as pious, kind, and dutiful, which is the polite historical way of saying she endured royal life like a velvet-wrapped anvil, silent and under crushing pressure. She followed Ferdinand across imperial Europe like a living Habsburg flag holding court in whichever capital needed, reminded that yes, the family was still running the show, and yes, they were still very much into romantic recycling. Sadly, Anne died young in 1547, likely worn out from the triple toll of constant childbirth, relentless state duties, and the emotional labor of pretending her family tree didn't just curl in on itself like a decorative breadstick. She didn't live to see Ferdinand crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. But through her, the Habsburgs swallowed up half of Central Europe like a dynastic black hole. Anne's life is the blueprint of elite inbreeding, born into a family that prized geography over genetics, continuity over common sense, and somehow still produced most of the emperors in Europe. Then we arrived at Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna Tranquil, who ruled in the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just tradition, it was a tactical survival strategy. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria and Marie of Valois, Joanna came with triple-strength royal credentials and at least 2 generations of cousin-stamped nobility in her veins. Her family tree resembles Mediterranean spaghetti. One branch was French Valois, the other was the Neapolitan Angevin, and every distant relative was a monarch with opinions and a sword. Her first husband, Andrew of Hungary, naturally a cousin. Their marriage was arranged by the Pope, which is medieval shorthand for this will go terribly. Andrew was boorish, unpopular, and treated with all the warmth Naples usually reserved for plagues. Joanna disliked him. The nobles disliked him. And when Andrew was crowned co-ruler, he was promptly murdered, allegedly strangled with a curtain cord. Whether Joanna gave the order or simply didn't stop the cord from doing its job remains historically ambiguous. Let's call it fatal incompatibility. Undeterred, Joanna married again, and again, and again. Husband number 2, Louis of Taranto, a cousin. Number 3, James IV of Majorca, yet another cousin. Number 4, Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, a minor noble who shockingly wasn't a cousin. Scandalous. If inbreeding had been an Olympic event, Joanna would have medaled 4 times before lunch. Yet politically, she was a powerhouse. She ruled Naples solo, defied the Pope-supported reform, and stood firm during the Western Schism, earning herself an excommunication and an impressive number of enemies. Eventually, Charles of Durazzo, yet another relative to conquest issues, overthrew her, imprisoned her, and allegedly smothered her with a pillow. Given Joanna's life, it may have been the most familiar ending possible. Then there was Isabella Clara Eugenia, born in 1566 to Philip II of Spain, and Elizabeth of Valois, yet another cousinly combo. By this point, the Habsburgs weren't a family, they were a genetic experiment with the throne. From a young age, Isabella was trained for power. That meant mastering Latin theology, diplomacy, and the subtle art of pretending her uncle wasn't also her cousin. Her father adored her, possibly because she was clever and obedient, or maybe because she didn't try to marry a Frenchman. Either way, she was groomed to inherit the Spanish Empire. But inheritance laws weren't keen on daughters, so her fate would come down to what else marriage. Her groom, Archduke Albert of Austria, yes, a cousin. And if you're surprised, welcome to your first week studying European royal history. The couple were named co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands, a lovely euphemism for governing a region best known for rebellions, religious wars, and passive-aggressive provinces. Despite the constant chaos, Isabella ruled with sharp intellect, devout Catholicism, and the serene confidence of a woman who could trace her lineage to everyone important and several people she wasn't legally allowed to marry. Her union with Albert was reported happy, or at least tolerably peaceful, possibly due to their matching DNA and mutual respect. When Albert died in 1621, Isabella took a vow of chastity, dressed as a nun, and ruled alone as governor on behalf of Spain. It didn't slow her down. She signed peace treaties, soothed unrest, and kept the mail running. That's right, rebellions, diplomacy, logistics. She was basically a one-woman cabinet. Isabella died in 1633, one of the few Habsburgs remembered not for madness or medical oddities, but for competence. A miracle of dynamic strategy, inbreeding, and solid crisis management. Now we meet Mary of Burgundy, born in 1457, the only child of Charles the Bold and Isabella of Bourbon. Her birth was a genetic cocktail of Burgundian ambition and Bourbon blood, which is to say she had power property and a target on her back. Her inheritance, a massive chunk of European territory, a dynasty obsessed with noble unions between surnames that repeat like a Gregorian chant, and the crushing expectation that she'd marry someone whose family tree looked suspiciously similar to her own. When her father Charles the Bold died in battle, Mary of Burgundy was just 19 and suddenly in charge of the richest, most politically unstable duchy in Europe. Burgundy became the hot potato of 15th century geopolitics. The French wanted it. The Habsburgs wanted it. The neighbors wanted it. The cousins especially wanted it. To stabilize her lands, Mary married Maximilian of Austria, the future Holy Roman Emperor, and naturally her second cousin once removed. A glowing Habsburg match. After all, in this royal dating pool, the family wasn't swimming, it was doing synchronized laps. But their marriage arranged, though it was turned out to be not just politically brilliant, but brace yourself, delightful. Maximilian brought muscle and diplomacy. Mary brought power and lands. Together they were a medieval power couple that could sign treaties and conquer cities before lunch. Still, her reign was short and eventful. Besieged by French aggression, rebellious Flemish towns, and men who believed a woman shouldn't rule unless she was doing needlework, Mary pushed back. She signed the Great Privilege, giving rights to her subjects, and reminded everyone that the Duchess was not just a figurehead in a fancy dress. She co-ruled with Maximilian like a modern CEO with a baby on one hip and a sword in the other. Then tragedy. In 1482, while out hunting, because nobles flirted with death the way others flirted with poetry, Mary fell from her horse, broke her back, and died at just 25. It was suddenly devastating and left Maximilian in mourning and Europe in chaos over who got custody of the children. Her death changed history. Burgundy, once independent, was absorbed into the Habsburg Empire through her son Philip the Handsome. Yes, the same Philip who married Joanna the Mad and gifted half of Europe with the famous overachieving jawline. Next up, Maria Theresa of Austria, born in 1717, the only surviving child of Emperor Charles VI. Her birth was met with polite disappointment. After all, she wasn't a son. But Charles, either hopelessly optimistic or catastrophically naive, issued the Pragmatic Sanction, a document that basically said, I know she's a woman, but she still gets the empire. Deal with it. Spoiler, Europe did not deal with it. When Charles died in 1740, Maria Theresa inherited the sprawling Habsburg dominions and a diplomat powder keg. Nearly every major power challenges her right to rule not because she lacks ability, but because she dared to be a woman without a confirmed first cousin marriage on her resume. That was quickly corrected. Maria Theresa married Francis Stephen of Lorraine, whose surprise was technically her distant cousin. Together they produced 16 children. Yes, 16. Because when you're running an empire and also creating the next 5 generations of European royalty, you don't stop at a tidy family. You build a dynasty with backup dynasties. But Maria Theresa had no royal ornament. She reformed the military, overhauled taxation, centralized the bureaucracy, modernized education, and still found time to be pregnant almost every other year. She made today's multitaskers look like amateurs. Of course, she was still a Habsburg. That meant deep Catholic faith-intense micromanagement and a zealous commitment to marrying her children off to the same 6 noble houses until the family tree looked like tightly wound ivy strangling the continent. The result, an even thicker web of royal entanglements, stretches from Spain to Austria to Naples, and eventually the guillotine. She ruled until 1780, outliving her husband, surviving several wars, and ensuring the Habsburgs kept their grip on Europe well into the Enlightenment. Her son Joseph II, who inherited the empire, also inherited her stubborn determination and some truly complex ancestry charts. And now enter Yolande of Aragon, born in 1384 to King John the Fenin of Aragon and Violent of Bar. From birth, she was surrounded by so many noble families. It's a miracle she had room for a personality. Her family tree was less a branching structure and more a tangled root system, where a cousin could double as both your rival and your future in-law. But Yolande wasn't just titled, she was clever. Politically savvy, educated, and by medieval standards, a borderline revolutionary. Her marriage to Louis II of Anjou, a French prince and yes cousin, wasn't just dynastic glue, it was a launching point, although technically Queen Consort of Naples. Yolande didn't sit in a corner sewing flags. She ran Anjou like a boss, raised armies, bankrolled campaigns, and navigated European politics like a one-woman game of chess. One of her boldest moves, supporting Joan of Arc. While kings hesitated and bishops quibbled, Yolande threw her support behind the Maid of Orléans and somehow lived to tell the tale. While her husband gallivanted around Europe making messy claims, Yolande held the real power. She raised her children with strategic brilliance, ensuring they married royally, of course, with cousins, and kept a tight leash on her lands. She was the kind of woman who made medieval chroniclers nervous and modern historians cheer. If royalty was a chessboard, Yolande of Aragon wasn't a pawn. She was the player. Her son, René of Anjou, became known as the Good, possibly because he inherited his mother Yolande's brains and only some of her family's interlocking chromosomes. Her daughter Marie married Charles V of France, giving Yolande not only access to the French throne, but also a discreet grip on Joan of Arc's military campaigns without ever lifting a sword. Yolande wasn't just another embroidered name on a royal tapestry. She was one of the few medieval women to wield actual power without ever holding an official throne. Behind every indecisive king and overly ambitious general stood a Yolande rolling her eyes, correcting maps, and deliberately redrawing the boundaries of power. She died in 1442, having outlasted her enemies, her husbands, and most of the 100 Years' War. Was she inbred? Absolutely. But she was also incisive, calculating, and about 10 moves ahead of the kings, she quietly outplayed. Margaret of York, born in 1446 to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville came from a family so drenched in nobility it could trip over its own heraldry. As sister to Edward IV, Richard III, and roughly half the War of the Roses, Margaret's DNA was preloaded for intrigue, bold decision-making, and exceptionally intimate dinner parties. Naturally, she married Charles, the bold Duke of Burgundy, famous for his ambition, military obsession, and crucially for being yet another cousin swimming in the pan-European gene pool. Their 1468 marriage was less about hearts and flowers and more about making France very, very nervous. Margaret brought English prestige. Charles brought a very sharp beard and a dangerous enthusiasm for battles he rarely finished. Their union, while politically driven, was reported functional, which in royal terms is practically a love story. Margaret adapted quickly to Burgundian court life, which was less medieval dungeon and more Renaissance influencer, think miniature dogs, silk overdose, and embroidery that could double as a diplomatic weapon. Her intelligence and poise earned her the nickname the Great Lady of the Netherlands. After Charles died predictably in battle, Margaret did not fade into widowhood. She became regent for her stepdaughter Mary of Burgundy and advisor to her stepson-in-law Maximilian of Austria. Yes, that Maximilian who married Mary and assured that the Habsburgs would infect even more branches of Europe's already tangled family shrubbery. Margaret didn't have children herself, but she helped raise Philip the Handsome, who later married Joanna the Mad, making her a crucial curator of Europe's most genetically determined imperial line. She died in 1503, outliving her brothers, most of her enemies, and the last flickers of Burgundy's golden age. Margaret may not have added her own children to the royal knot, but rest assured she tied that knot tighter with diplomacy etiquette and the kind of smug, dynastic finesse that leaves entire continents ruled by your godchildren. Catherine de' Medici, born in 1519 into the powerful and occasionally scandal-riddled Medici family of Florence, technically escaped the inbreeding trap for a moment. Her ancestry includes at least some non-cousins, which makes her practically an exotic import by European standards. But don't worry, she'd correct that soon enough. Catherine married Henry II of France, a political power move that united Italy's banking dynasty with France's royal drama. While Henry wasn't a blood cousin, he was definitely part of the political family tree somewhere near the roots that occasionally caught fire. Catherine arrived in France with little clout, a suspicious Tuscan accent, and Diane de Poitiers, her husband's glamorous and very public mistress. But Catherine was no wallflower. Over a decade, she quietly built alliances, learned the dark art of court politics, and birthed a small army of children, 10 to be exact. Many of whom would go on to marry cousins because while Catherine may not have been born Habsburg, she certainly parented like one. When Henry died, after taking a jousting lance to the eye, because nothing says fragile masculinity like dying in a sport you invented, Catherine became Queen Mother and the de facto ruler of France. Her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, wore the crown in rotation. Catherine ruled behind each of them like a shadow in Pearl's equal parts matriarch and Machiavelli. She was devoutly Catholic, but politically elastic, which meant sometimes funding Protestant weddings, and sometimes arranging massacres at those weddings. Cough St. Bartholomew's Day, massacre, cough. That PR disaster didn't help her already tense reputation. Even for a woman whose daughters married into 3 of Europe's top dynasties, poisoning guests at dinner was considered a bit extra, Catherine became the scapegoat for just about everything: religious wars, court decadence, and the suspiciously high demand for antidotes in French goodwill. But she was also a shrewd patron of the arts, a stabilizing force in a collapsing monarchy, and the reason the Valois dynasty managed to keep limping forward for a few more decades. She died in 1589, politically drained, but still quietly scheming. Her legacy: a generation of royals who always looked suspiciously alike, ruled with the occasional firestorm of religious violence, and proved that even if you marry out, you can breed in. In ancient Greece, falling asleep wasn't just a bodily necessity, it was a sacred crossing, a hush between worlds. Nowhere was this belief more alive than in the Asclepia dream temples devoted to the healing god Asclepius. These weren't quaint shrines or rustic hostels. They were sprawling spiritual sanctuaries where the sick, the desperate, and the devout came not merely for treatment, but for transformation. To sleep in these sacred halls, one had to be worthy. Pilgrims fasted for days, bathed in holy springs, offered sacrifices, and abstained from sex and impure thoughts. Only when body and soul were ritually cleansed could they lie within the abaton, a pitch-dark chamber where incense curled like whisper prayers, and the flicker of torchlight played tricks on the walls. Here in the hush of the chamber, sleep was not passive, it was a divine summons. The dream was a bridge, a message from Asclepius himself, cloaked in symbolism, or at times starting clarity. One might dream of snakes slithering across the body, an omen of favor, not fear. Snakes were sacred to the god emblems of renewal and divine touch. Non-venomous serpents roamed the temples, freely coiling through chambers, sanctifying dreams with their presence. In the morning, priests act as interpreters of the night's mysteries. They listen, they decoded, they prescribed herbs, diet changes, or sometimes nothing at all, because the vision itself was believed to mend the soul. In these sanctuaries, sleep was not escape, it was communion. A ritual descent into the realm of gods where dreams might not only heal the flesh, but reweave the fate. In ancient Egypt, sleep was a small death, a nightly departure of the soul into unseen worlds. It left the body vulnerable, and so the Egyptians didn't simply drift off, they prepared. Their bedtime was ritual, sacred, protective. Especially for the priestly and noble classes, sleep was a cosmic event. Incense, frankincense, and myrrh was burned not just for scent, but to drive off demons and invite divine guardianship. The rising smoke curled like prayers toward the stars, encircling the sleeper in invisible armor. Then came invocations, chants to Thoth, god of wisdom and dreams, or to Bes, the fierce dwarf deity, whose grotesque face protected sleepers from lurking horrors. His image adorned headboards and walls, a divine nightlight for the spiritually cautious. Even the bed was part of the ritual, raised, carved with symbols, and crowned with special headrests that looked like torture devices, but were meant to align the soul with the stars. Direction mattered. Many aligned their sleep with Orion, the sacred constellation of Osiris. If the soul seeks answers or healing, one might sleep in temple complexes like those of Serapis or Imhotep. Their priests guided dream incubations with oils, music, and prayer. Sleep was summoned like a god, and the dream was a dialogue. To Egyptians, bedtime wasn't rest. It was risk and opportunity wrapped in ritual, a spiritual navigation through unseen skies. In ancient Babylon, sleep was a nightly gamble. The dream world was not neutral, it was charged, divine, and dangerous. Each night, the boundary between this world and the next thinned. Dreams were fate in disguise. The Babylonians took dreams so seriously that they trained entire classes of priests, Sha'ilu experts, in decoding the will of the gods as revealed through sleep. Before bed, a Babylonian might anoint themselves, recite incantations, or draw protective symbols around their sleeping space, an astral lock against demonic intrusion. They wore amulets, burned juniper and cedar wood, not for comfort, but to clean the path for divine traffic. For them, Marduk Ishtar or Enki might visit in dreams, but so might restless ghosts or vengeful spirits. Sleep was a spiritual inbox, and you needed the right firewall. Dreams were categorized, recorded, and analyzed. Whole tablets were dedicated to decoding signs. If you dream of a lion, it might mean war. If you dreamed of water, it might mean change or doom. And sometimes, if the dream was good enough, it didn't need medicine. The dream itself was healing, a gift, a warning, a spell made visible. To the Babylonians, sleep wasn't passively reposed. It was active divination. And every night was another page in the divine ledger of fate. These prayers weren't casual requests, they were sacred negotiations. Ancient Babylonians asked for clarity, begged for protection against false visions, and prayed for safe passage through the dream world, a place as treacherous as any battlefield. If a person faces a great decision, whether to marry, march to war, or plant at the turning of seasons, they might sleep in a temple, or even beneath the open stars. This practice was called dream incubation, a slumber offered as a sacred petition to the gods. And when the dreams came, strange, luminous, terrifying, they were not forgotten. They were etched into clay tablets sometimes, with illustrations giving form to the ephemeral. These records grew into vast dream dictionaries, painstaking catalogs of symbols and their meanings. Dream of a lion, prepare for triumph. Dream of drowning, expect betrayal. These books weren't bedtime novelties. They were oracles, their logic so compelling it would later shape Greek and Roman dream theory. To the Babylonians, sleep was not rest. It was a divine audition, a nightly chance to hear the gods speak. And if you prepare your soul properly, burned the right incense, chanted the right words, arranged your bed with sacred geometry, you might receive a message strong enough to change your destiny. In the ancient Vedic world of India, sleep was more than a pause between days. It was a sacred dissolution, a return. The Atman, the soul, was believed to drift back into the eternal Brahman, the cosmic spirit, every night. And as dawn broke, it was reborn once more into waking life. This daily cycle wasn't simply poetic. It was cosmological truth, wrapped in breath, ritual, and reverence. Sleep was entered with preparation, never carelessness. The wise practiced pranayama, control of breath, to still the thoughts and align one's rhythms with the universe. Not to fall asleep quickly, but to fall asleep correctly. Even the act of breathing became a ritual, a gentle dance between soul and sky. Mantras whisper into the dusk, served as spiritual shields. The Gayatri mantra was a favorite chanted while facing the sinking sun, calling light into darkness. Orientation mattered too. Sleeping with the head toward the north or south was avoided. Those were the directions of death. East points to knowledge, west to rest. Even the bedding mattered. Mats of kusha grass, animal hide, or soft cotton weren't just for comfort. They were conductors for spiritual clarity. Before bed, warm sesame oil was massaged into the skin, a practice abhyanga, to soothe the nerves and guide the mind toward restful depth. Fragrant herbs like ashwagandha, tulsi, or brahmi were consumed or burned, each selected not for their scent, but their soul-aligning properties. Dreams themselves were diagnosed. A nightmare wasn't just a fluke. It was a karmic warning, a sign of inner imbalance. Often sages or RSIs would be consulted to read their meanings. Because for the Vedic seers, sleep was not a departure. It was a return to the truth. And then there was China, where Taoist wisdom ancient turned sleep into a kind of alchemical rite. It wasn't just about rest, it was about realignment. To sleep well means your qi flowed freely, your heart was calm, and your spirit, your soul rested safely in its celestial harbor. Taoist masters treated bedtime like temple entry. They moved slowly, breathed deeply, and cleared the mind before lying down. Their aim was not unconsciousness, it was harmony. Movements like qigong, flowing and meditative, were performed to prepare the body's meridians. Meditation followed to anchor the shen, the spirit housed in the heart, which could wander dangerously if agitated by stress, diet, or noise. The sleeping chamber itself was curated like a sacred grove. Beds were firm and low, often made of bamboo or wood to allow proper energy flow. Decorations were sparse. Clutter improved qi, and chaos in the room meant chaos in the dream. Direction was crucial too. Sleeping on the right side aided digestion and dream clarity. The geomantic principles of early feng shui dictate how a bed should face, never towards doors, never towards mirrors. Cleanliness was spiritual hygiene. In Taoist cosmology, two souls inhabited the human body, the Po, which stayed with the flesh, and the Hun, which traveled. During sleep, the hunk ascended. Dreaming was its flight. And when it returned, the dreamer awoke restored. But if the dreamer woke frightened, drained, or confused, it was said the Hun had gotten lost, or worse, attacked. To protect it, people placed talismans or charms of cinnabar beneath their pillows, invoking spirits for safe passage. Dreams weren't symbols to decode, they were journeys. If your soul wandered well, you rose feeling lighter. If it wandered poorly, you were haunted. Taoists saw dreams as soul maps, messages traced in starlight, and qi revealing where the energy flowed clean and where it faltered. To sleep well, they believed, was to live long, and so every night became a sacred act of internal alchemy, nurturing balance, reshaping spirit, and inching ever closer to immortality. The sleeper had to be spiritually prepared, cleansed in mind, body, and intention. Sleep among the Celts, particularly within Druidic circles, was often preceded by rituals of purification and alignment with the natural world. Sacred groves were preferred sleeping sites for vision-seeking Druids' places, where the veil between worlds thinned like morning mist. There, surrounded by oak, ash, and yew, the seeker would fast, meditate, and commune with the elements before allowing sleep to claim them. Herbs were central to Celtic sleep rites. Mugwort, a plant long associated with prophetic dreams, was burned as incense or tucked beneath pillows to invite visions. Valerian and vervain were also used to calm the body and open the spirit. Sleepers might also anoint their temples with sacred oils or bind sprigs of protective herbs into their hair. The moon's phase and the alignment of stars were consulted. The Celts were sky watchers, believing that the cosmos echoed truths that might ripple through a dreamer's mind when properly attuned. Druids sometimes use ritual chants or tonal harmonics, low repetitive sounds, to lull themselves or others into trance-like states. These chants were more than lullabies. They were keys to the otherworld-coded rhythms that vibrated between planes. If a vision came, a white stag, a silver spear, a shadowed woman cloaked in feathers, it was not taken lightly. Such dreams were considered divine instructions, prophetic signals, or ancestral messages. Some dreams were omens, others tasks. A vision of standing at a river's edge might indicate an impending threshold in life, a crossing, a death, a rebirth. Dreamers would return from these spiritual journeys, change their insights, often shared in council or woven into bardic tales. Among the Celt storytellers were not mere entertainers. They were keepers of dream lore, those who could recall the symbols passed down from sleep to story, from myth to meaning. Sleep was not separate from life. It was a parallel practice, as sacred as ceremony and as necessary as breath. To the ancient Celts, dreams were offerings gathered from the otherworld, wild, cryptic, and often poetic in their revelations. One did not merely wake from such dreams, one returned from them. The body and spirit had to be primed. Night rituals often began with purification using herbs. Mugwort vein and yarrow plants, still associated with dreams and visions today, were burned or placed under pillows to enhance dream clarity. The smoke from these herbs was believed to thin the veil between worlds. Some even brewed them into teas or potions before bed, consumed with whispered prayers to the fair folk or ancestral spirits. Sleep spaces were deliberately chosen for geomantic alignment. Certain hills, stone circles, or sacred groves were believed to be points of energetic convergence, places where dreams could be more potent or the spirits more accessible. During certain festivals, especially Samhain, the Celtic New Year, and ancestor celebration, people would sleep in these areas to receive visions from their departed loved ones or messages from gods like Bridge or the Dagda. Some warriors and leaders reportedly sought prophetic dreams before battle, sleeping alone in caves or forests after intense fasting and chanting. These dreams were believed to carry omens about victory or doom and were treated with immense seriousness. Symbols from dreams like animals, colors, or landscapes were brought to the Philly Celtic poets and seers who interpreted them in verse. A white stag might mean transformation. A dream of drowning in a forest might point to betrayal. Dreams were woven into Celtic mythology, shaping both personal destinies and communal stories. In the Celtic world, the night wasn't silent. It pulsed with whispers from beyond, carried into the dreams of those brave or pure enough to listen. In ancient Japan, the line between sleep magic and the unseen was carefully navigated through a spiritual system known as onmodo, the way of yin and yang. Rooted in a blend of Taoist cosmology, Shinto spirituality, and Buddhist elements. Onodo offered both elite courtiers and commoners tools to protect the soul during slumber, and to harness the messages embedded in dreams. Central to Onodo was the belief that the night was a time when the yin forces, dark, hidden, and often chaotic, were strongest. Sleep made a person vulnerable to possession by malevolent spirits, known as yokai or urai, and to being influenced by bad kon or directional energy. To combat this, practitioners used a variety of pre-leap rituals that combined spiritual defense and purification. One such ritual involved the placement of a food paper talismans inscribed with sacred spells on bedroom walls or near sleeping mats. These charms were often blessed by an onyoji, a specialist trained in astrology divination and exorcism. The talismans could repel spirits, seal bad dreams, or channel good fortune. Before bed, it was also common to light incense made from sandalwood or aloes wood. The scent was believed to please guardian spirits and create a purifying barrier. In noble households, ritual chanting or silent recitation of Buddhist sutras might be performed to calm the mind and invite peaceful sleep. Those particularly sensitive to the spirit world would sleep facing auspicious directions, never north, which was associated with death. Children were especially vulnerable, so they were often protected with engraved amulets or had special dolls placed nearby to absorb or ward off negative energy. These dolls, called hetogata, were thought to take on the burden of the sleeper's spiritual vulnerabilities. Dreams themselves were frequently recorded in private journals or shared with monks and divers. If someone dreamt of fire, blood, or animals, it could signify impending illness, betrayal, or divine warning. Conversely, dreams of flying waterfalls or lotus flowers might herald spiritual growth or blessings. Dreams were messages, but only if you knew how to read them, and only if you survived the night unscathed. For the ancient Japanese, sleep was not to be taken lightly. It was a ritual, a strategy, and a spiritual gauntlet passed through nightly under the silent watch of spirits and stars. Long before the city of Alexandria dominated the Egyptian coastline, there was Heracleion, known to the Egyptians as Thonis. For centuries, it stood as the primary port of entry into Egypt, a thriving center of commerce, religion, and diplomacy, where Greek merchants, Egyptian priests, and foreign emissaries crossed paths in a vibrant cultural melting pot. But by the time historians of the late medieval period were writing their chronicles, Heracleion had seemingly disappeared from history. Its location forgotten, its name preserved only in faded texts and half-remembered myths. Many dismissed it as a legend, a sort of Egyptian Atlantis. And yet it was real. Heracleion once sprawled across the Nile Delta, its canals winding past massive stone temples and marketplaces. Monumental statues of gods like among Garab and Horus towered above the harbors. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond docked there to pay taxes and seek permission to enter inland Egypt. Its customs house was one of the most important in the ancient world. It was also a religious capital, a place where pharaohs would perform ceremonial rites to gain legitimacy from the gods before their reigns began. So how does a city like that just vanish? Sometime between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE, a series of natural disasters struck the region. Earthquakes, rising sea levels, and a sudden phenomenon called liquefaction, where the soil beneath the city essentially turned to jelly, caused entire sections of Heracleion to collapse into the Mediterranean Sea. Over time, sand and silt buried the ruins, and the currents of the Nile's estuary erased what remained from view. Heracleion was literally wiped off the map. For over 1,000 years, the city remained hidden beneath the waves whispered about only in fragments by Herodotus and a few Greek scholars. No one truly believed it could be found. Not until the year 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Frank Godiot made a shocking discovery off the coast of Abukia Bay. There in the Siltrich seabed lay a city preserved like a time capsule, waiting patiently beneath 30 ft of water. Colossal statues, shipwrecks, gold coins, and inscribed steles began to surface, revealing that Heracleion had not been lost forever, only sleeping beneath the sea. At its peak, Heracleion was far more than a coastal outpost. It was the beating heart of Egypt's international trade, the first stop for foreign merchants and emissaries before they could pass further into the Nile's interior. Strategically positioned near the canopic mouth of the Nile, the city functioned as a customs checkpoint and a cultural filter. Everything coming into Egypt by sea had to pass through Heracleion first. Ships laden with olive oil, wine, incense, silver cedarwood, and luxury textiles arrived from the Aegean and the Levant. In return, Egypt offered its signature exports: papyrus, grain, linen, glacier, and gold. Heracleion was the first place where these exchanges were logged, taxed, and blessed, often under the watchful eyes of priestly officials and divine statues. The Greeks who arrived there were fascinated and often intimidated by what they saw. The temples were immense, carved from solid blocks of stone and flanked by statues over 5 meters tall. One temple in particular stood out, a massive sanctuary dedicated to Amun-Garb, the fusion of the Egyptian god Amun and a local deity. Pharaohs would come here to receive the divine blessing of their rule, participating in ritual coronations that reinforced their legitimacy in the eyes of both gods and men. And yet Heracleion wasn't just about religion and trade. It was also a cosmopolitan city where Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and others lived, worked, and mingled. Artifacts recovered from the seabed include inscriptions in both Greek and Egyptian, amulets, jewelry, and even tax records scratched into tablets. These finds reveal a city that thrived not on isolation, but on connection, a city that lived and breathed through its interactions with the wider Mediterranean world. Frank Godiot's underwater excavations have uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, many of which were used to ferry goods to and from Heracleion's busy docks. Anchors, ceramics, and coins confirm that trade was both extensive and regulated. Temples kept detailed records of taxes collected from incoming cargo gold for the state incense for the gods. In short, Heracleion was Egypt's maritime soul, a place where divine authority met international commerce. It stood as the guardian of the Nile, welcoming the world and guarding its secrets until the sea reclaimed them. One of the most astonishing revelations about Heracleion came not from coins or ships, but from the massive temples that still rest beneath the sea. These weren't minor shrines tucked into corners. They were sprawling monumental structures made of limestone and granite dedicated to gods who ruled the Nile and the cosmos itself. The crown jewel of the city was the Temple of Amun-Garab, a massive religious complex that likely served both political and spiritual functions. It was here that pharaohs received divine sanction, performing rituals to confirm their legitimacy. Heracleion wasn't just a customs checkpoint. It was a place of ritual coronation where Egyptian rulers spiritually tied themselves to the divine order, the concept known as Mayat. But the real marvel is how much of it still survives. When Frank Gaudio and his team dove beneath the silt-choked waters of Abukia Bay, they discovered colossal statues, many still standing upright. Some measured over 5 meters tall, including a massive statue of the god Happy, symbol of abundance, and the flooding Nile. Others included statues of queens and pharaohs carved with astonishing precision. What's more shocking, some were found nearly intact, despite being underwater for over 1,000 years. Then there were the steely giant stone slabs inscribed with hieroglyphs. One particularly important find was the decree of Nectaranebo Fi, an official proclamation carved into granite, which listed religious laws and temple privileges. Its survival underwater is a miracle in itself, and it offered hard proof that Heracleion wasn't just myth, but a major religious hub backed by the state. Temples in Heracleion were not only religious centers, they also acted as repositories of wealth and knowledge. Offerings from around the Mediterranean poured in. Gold alabaster jars, ritual knives, and incense burners. Statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus lined temple halls, and ceremonial boats were used in sacred processions, some of which were found submerged, but astonishingly well preserved. What these temples reveal is clear. Heracleion was a spiritual capital, not just a trade port. The rituals performed here shaped the destiny of kings, blessed the economy, and bridged the world of the living with the realm of the gods. All now eerily silent, but preserved in stone beneath the waves. For over 1,000 years, Heracleion was lost, buried beneath layers of sediment, forgotten by maps, and dismissed by many as myth. But in the year 2000, the silence of the sea was finally broken. French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio, backed by the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, EI Messam, made a discovery that would stun the world. The sunken remains of a city that defied time. Gaudio had spent years studying ancient texts and scouring the murky waters of Abukia Bay, just off the coast of modern-day Alexandria. The region had long been suspected of hiding secrets. Clues were buried in the writings of Herodotus, Strabo, and Egyptian records, all hinting at a once great city swallowed by the Mediterranean. But until Gaudio's expedition, no one had found physical proof. Using advanced sonar and magnetometry, his team scanned the sea floor, identifying anomalies hidden beneath of silt. What emerged wasn't just a scattering of relics. It was a fully submerged city. Whole streets, canals, temples, statues, and shipwrecks lay preserved in the anaerobic depths, protected from erosion by layers of mud and river sediment. The first things recovered were colossal statues, including 2 imposing 5-meter figures of Atomic King and Queen, believed to represent a ruling couple who had once governed Heracleion. Soon followed a massive stele inscribed in both Egyptian and Greek, confirming the city's identity. The bilingual inscriptions were a historian's dream. Tangible proof that Thonis and Heracleion were in fact the same city known by different names to Egyptians and Greeks. Over the next few years, Gaudio's team uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, thousands of coins, weights, religious artifacts, and ceremonial vessels. What made this discovery extraordinary wasn't just the volume, but the state of preservation. Unlike ruins found on land, these artifacts were untouched by lutters or weather frozen in time beneath the silt. Frank Godio's rediscovery of Heracleion wasn't just an archaeological achievement, it was a resurrection. A city believed to be legend was now re-emerging piece by piece, offering a stunning glimpse into a world thought lost forever. And perhaps most exciting of all, only a fraction of the city has been excavated. Heracleion still sleeps, waiting for the next dive. Heracleion's rise was spectacular, but its fall was slow, silent, and devastating. Unlike cities destroyed by fire or war, Heracleion vanished beneath the sea in a gradual, almost ghostly decline. There was no single day of doom. Instead, the city was lost through a series of natural disasters that unfolded over centuries. The kind of events too quiet to make headlines but powerful enough to erase a civilization. The first culprit was tectonic activity. The Nile Delta sits on a seismically active zone, and Heracleion's foundations were particularly vulnerable. Small but repeated earthquakes may have weakened the soft, waterlogged ground beneath the city, which was built on silt and clay rather than firm bedrock. But it wasn't just the tremors that doomed Heracleion. It was a geological phenomenon known as liquefaction. Liquefaction happens when the ground becomes saturated with water and loses its ability to support weight. Imagine a layer of wet sand suddenly turning to quicksand. That's what happened beneath Heracleion. As earthquakes shook the delta and rising sea levels pushed salt water further inland, the earth literally liquefied and whole sections of the city began to sink. Buildings, temples, even ships pulled downward into the mud. Over time, the city fragmented, canals overflowed, quays collapsed, and temples began to tilt and vanish below the surface. The bustling port slowly became unusable, forcing trade to shift westward toward Alexandria, which rose in prominence. By the end of the 2nd century, BCE, Heracleion's importance was waning. By the 8th century CE, it had almost completely disappeared beneath the waters of the Mediterranean. What's chilling is how little anyone did to stop it, because no one could. Nature moved slowly but relentlessly. The people of Heracleion didn't flee in panic. They adapted, rebuilt, and prayed. And then one day, it was simply gone. Boats still sailed over its submerged ruins. Fishermen cast their nets where stone gods once stood. The memory of the city faded until even its name became legend. Today, Heracleion's sinking is a stark reminder. Even the greatest cities can be undone. Not by enemies, but by the quiet, steady hand of nature. Heracleion may have vanished beneath the sea, but the artifacts recovered from its ruins paint a vivid picture of what daily life might have looked like in this once thriving Egyptian port. Far from being a purely ceremonial or political center, Heracleion was a live din, bustling with markets, temples, courtyards, and shipyards. A place where people worshipped, traded, argued, and dreamed. The city's layout, partially mapped through underwater surveys, shows a network of canals that ran between stone buildings and quays. Boats moved goods and people through the streets, just as carts would have in other cities. Heracleion was often referred to as the Venice of Egypt, though it predates Venice by well over 1,000 years. The architecture blended traditional Egyptian forms, pylons, obelisks, and temple courts, with Hellenistic influences brought in by Greek settlers. The people who lived here were a diverse mix: Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and other seafaring merchants. Excavated artifacts include Greek amphoe, Egyptian scarabs, and gold coins stamped with various rulers' faces. This melting pot of cultures meant that multiple languages were spoken, multiple gods were worshipped, and multiple traditions coexisted often within the same household. Religion was central to everyday life. Morning offerings to deities like Ammon-Isis and Osiris were as routine as breakfast. Temples weren't just for ceremony. They acted as economic engines, employing artisans, scribes, and priests. They stored wealth, administered law, and even recorded taxes. One stele recovered from the site reveals detailed temple protocols, including the taxation of imported goods, proving that religious life and trade were inseparably linked. Food came from both land and sea. Fish and shellfish were abundant thanks to the Nile Delta's brackish waters, while inland farms supplied grains, figs, and beer. Markets near the quays would have been noisy, colorful places filled with spices, textiles, and stories from faraway lands. And of course, there was entertainment. Statues and inscriptions suggest the presence of music, dance, and festivals, especially those honoring Osiris, which included ritual boat processions and dramatic performances. Heracleion was not just functional, it was alive. In the end, Heracleion wasn't just a port or a holy site. It was a home. Its people lived ordinary lives beneath the shadows of colossal gods, unaware that their world would someday become legend, entombed in water. As Heracleion's fortunes began to decline, a new city was rising just a short sail down the coast. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. In many ways, Alexandria didn't just succeed Heracleion. It supplanted it, becoming the jewel of the Mediterranean and the new beating heart of Egypt's maritime and intellectual life. But the relationship between the two cities wasn't purely competitive. It was part of a larger transformation in Egypt's political and cultural identity. At the time of Heracleion's prominence, Egypt was still ruled by native dynasties, and the city's importance was rooted in traditional Egyptian religion and its strategic location near the Nile Delta's entry point. Heracleion was where foreign ships were inspected, taxes were collected, and divine rituals legitimized kingship. But when the Timaeus, the Greek rulers who succeeded Alexander, took power, they shifted focus dramatically toward Greek customs, urban planning, and administration. Alexandria, with its grand library, massive lighthouse, and sweeping harbors, was built to impress and centralize power. The Ptolemies channeled trade through their new city, bypassing Heracleion in favor of a fresh Hellenistic capital. They imported Greek architecture, philosophy, and governance, and made Alexandria not just a trade hub, but a center of science, art, and politics. But for a time, the two cities coexisted. Religious ceremonies were still held in Heracleion, and temples remained operational. However, the balance was shifting. Administrative control moved to Alexandria, as did the elite classes and international attention. Heracleions slowly became a shadow of its former self, still holy, still respected, but no longer essential. Then came the environmental blows, the liquefaction of the ground, the rising sea levels, and the eventual submergence of Heracleion. As the city disappeared beneath the waves, Alexandria rose, untouched, its coastal position, more stable and better fortified. It inherited the legacy and the traffic that Heracleion once enjoyed. Today, the ruins of both cities tell two sides of the same story. One lies buried beneath the sea, its stones wrapped in silence. The other still buzzes with life, though much of its ancient grandeur has faded. But without Heracleion, there would be no Alexandria. The old city was the gateway and the foundation upon which Egypt's future was built. When Heracleion slipped beneath the sea, it took with it not just temples and statues, but the everyday belongings and sacred objects that defined life in a great city. And thanks to the oxygen-poor, silt-rich waters of Ibukia Bay, many of these items have been preserved in astonishing condition, allowing modern archaeologists to piece together not just what the city looked like, but how its people lived, worked, worshipped, and sailed. Among the most breathtaking discoveries are the colossal statues, some measuring over 5 meters tall. These include representations of Ptolemaic rulers, Egyptian deities like Isis and Hapi, and even monumental sphinxes. Though toppled by time, many were found lying where they fell, surrounded by temple debris, as if the moment of collapse had been frozen in mud. Their expressions, posture, and inscriptions are still visible, testifying to the artistic skill of the city's craftsmen. But it's not just the monumental that survived. Divers have uncovered thousands of smaller artifacts. Gold coins, lead weights, ceremonial tools, jewelry, and fragments of pottery. One particularly fascinating find was a cache of bronze ritual vessels likely used in temple ceremonies, bearing intricate inscriptions and religious iconography. Others include oil lamps, writing tools, and personal adornments, the kinds of things someone might have carried in a satchel or kept on a home altar. Heracleion was also a port, and its maritime legacy is undeniable. Over 70 shipwrecks have been identified, many preserved with their cargo still aboard. Wooden hulls, anchors, and nautical tools have helped researchers understand how ancient Egyptians and their foreign visitors navigated trade. Some ships even appear to have sunk while docked, suggesting they went down during the same seismic events that doomed the city. Perhaps most mysterious are the stelae and bilingual inscriptions written in both ancient Egyptian and Greek. These texts serve as legal documents, religious edicts, and temple inventories, offering direct testimony from the past. One stelely confirmed the city's dual identity as both Thonis and Heracleion, solving a historical mystery that had puzzled scholars for generations. In essence, the sea became Heracleion's accidental museum, a place of ruin, yes, but also of preservation. The artifacts pulled from the depths are not just remnants. They are living whispers from a forgotten world, etched in stone, bronze, and silence. Heracleion may be underwater, but its story is far from buried. In fact, the city's rediscovery has sparked a renaissance in how we understand ancient Egypt's relationship with the sea, with foreign cultures, and with the divine. What was once dismissed as a myth, a name whispered by Herodotus, half believed by scholars, is now a powerful reminder that history still holds secrets waiting to rise from the deep. In many ways, Heracleion challenges the traditional image of Egypt as a desert civilization locked along the Nile. This was a maritime city, cosmopolitan, and open to the world. Its culture was not static or insular. It embraced foreign influence while retaining a deeply Egyptian soul. The very existence of bilingual inscriptions and Greco-Egyptian religious fusion shows a society that was adaptive, fluid, and complex. For archaeologists and historians, Heracleion is a gold mine, not just of physical objects, but of context. It helps fill the gaps in our understanding of Egypt's late dynastic and early Hellenistic periods. It shows us what a living port city looked like, how temples functioned as both sacred and bureaucratic centers, and how natural disaster could slowly unmake an empire's gateway. But the city's legacy isn't just academic. It's deeply human. The statues, the coins, the wrecked ships, they tell stories of real people. Merchants tallying cargo, priests whispering incantations in temple courtyards, sailors docking in foreign harbors under the eyes of stone gods, mothers praying to Isis for their children's safety. All of that life preserved underwater silent for 1,000 years now speaks again. The discovery of Heraclean has also changed the future of archaeology itself. It's proof that submerged cities aren't fantasy. With the rise of sea levels and shifting climates, modern scientists are now rethinking what might lie beneath other coasts. Carthage, ancient Alexandria, even parts of India and Southeast Asia. Heraclean has become a blueprint for uncovering the past in the most unexpected places. Today, its treasures are displayed in museums. Its story is told in documentaries and books. But the city still sleeps beneath the waves, mostly unexcavated, vast, and waiting. Heraclean is no longer lost, but it remains a mystery, a ghost city between worlds whispering across time from a sunken age of gods' trade and vanished empires. Long before modern dentistry and fluoride toothpaste, ancient humans already understood a painful truth. Toothaches suck, and they didn't just suffer through them, they actually tried to treat them. In fact, some of the earliest evidence of dental care goes back nearly 9,000 years, showing that early humans were far more medically inventive than we tend to assume. In the Meghar region of present day, Pakistan archaeologists uncovered human remains dating back to around 7,000 BCE. What they found stunned the scientific community. Several skulls with teeth that had been drilled using flint tools. These weren't accidental marks or signs of trauma. They were precise, intentional holes carefully bored into mares. The teeth belonged to adult individuals, meaning they survived the drilling process. And if that sounds painful, it probably was. There's no evidence of anesthetic, just grit-sharp stones and a willingness to endure agony in the name of relief. These drills were likely powered by bowstrings, using a technique similar to fire starting back and forth spinning that allowed the flint bit to grind into enamel. It's the earliest known form of dentistry predating Egyptian civilization by millennia. Why did they do it? Theories suggest it was to remove decayed material, relieve pressure from abscesses, or possibly even for ritual reasons. In some cases, the teeth showed signs of bumunumen or resin, which might have been used to seal the cavity afterward, a very crude form of filling. This wasn't an isolated case. In other prehistoric cultures, teeth were filed, pulled, and even stained. Among some African and Indonesian groups, tooth modification was common not always for medical reasons, but as a form of social identity or spiritual protection. Still, the fact remains, humans understood the importance of their teeth and weren't afraid to go DIY when decay set in. Even in these early eras, dental problems were more than just annoying. They could be deadly. An untreated abscess could lead to infection, fever, and even death. Which explains why, in a world without antibiotics drilling out the rot, no matter how crude, the method may have saved lives. So while they lacked porcelain crowns and Novocaine, prehistoric people weren't clueless. They faced dental pain with stone tools, raw courage, and shocking precision, setting the stage for everything that came next. When it comes to ancient medicine, Egypt often steals the spotlight, and dentistry was no exception. The Egyptians didn't just acknowledge tooth problems, they created an entire medical field around it. In fact, the world's first known dentist was an Egyptian named Hesi-Ra, who lived around 2600 BCE. During the reign of Pharaoh José, his tomb bears the title Chief of Dentists and Physicians, suggesting that dental care was already a respected profession in the Old Kingdom. But if you're picturing a calm clinic with copper tools and smiling patients, think again. Egyptian dentistry was an intense blend of practical techniques and magical incantations. The famous Ibaz papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, includes remedies for toothaches, infections, and gum disease. Some treatments involved chewed herbs and honey, both of which have antimicrobial properties. Others, however, involved placing a dead mouse on the aching tooth and recite spells to drive away evil spirits. Not exactly Ada approved. Egyptians also understood the concept of oral hygiene. They used twig toothbrushes chewed on aromatic sticks to freshen breath, and even made rudimentary toothpaste from crushed eggshells, ox hooves, pumice, and myrrh. It was gritty, abrasive, and not particularly minty, but it worked. In terms of real procedures, evidence from excavated mummies shows attempts at dental surgery. Some skulls show drilled mears similar to those in prehistoric Pakistan, while others have abscesses that appear to have been drained. There are also signs of crude splints used to stabilize loose teeth. Still, most Egyptians likely suffered through dental problems without major intervention. Their diet, filled with stone ground bread, introduced plenty of sand and grit into their mouths, which wore teeth down prematurely and caused fractures. Interestingly, archaeologists have found gold wires and metal bands in a few skulls, possibly the earliest examples of dental bridges or stabilization devices. Whether they were used in life or added posthumously is debated, but they prove one thing. Egyptians were thinking creatively about how to preserve the structure of the mouth. In essence, ancient Egyptian dentistry was part science, part superstition. They understood infection, practiced hygiene, and experimented with surgical tools, all while invoking gods like Sekhmet and Theon. They may not have had anesthetic, but they had ambition, and that made all the difference. While the Egyptians were mixing myrrh and ox hooves into gritty toothpaste, the Etruscans of ancient Italy were pioneering something far more glamorous: dental prosthetics. Long before the Romans dominated the Mediterranean, these highly skilled artisans were crafting what could be considered the first dental bridges. Elegant, functional solutions to missing teeth that would influence dentistry for centuries, dating back to around 700 BCE. Etruscan burial sites have revealed skulls fitted with gold bands and wire ligatures, holding replacement teeth in place. These weren't just functional fixes. They were status symbols. In many cases, the replacement teeth were not artificial at all. They were real human or animal teeth sometimes, from oxen fitted neatly alongside the living teeth, using loops of fine gold. It was delicate, precise, and quite possibly painful. But it worked. The Etruscans were known for their metallurgical skill, and that extended to dentistry. The gold bands used in their bridges were soft enough to manipulate, yet strong enough to hold teeth securely in place. These were not quick fixes for commoners. Rather, they were custom dental work for the elite, likely performed by skilled metal workers or physicians associated with religious or noble households. What's remarkable is how aesthetic their dental solutions were. These bridges weren't just functional. They were crafted to restore facial symmetry and preserve appearance. The Etruscans understood long before modern cosmetic dentistry that missing teeth altered not just chewing, but the entire shape of the face. In a society where appearance and status were deeply intertwined, this mattered a great deal. There's no direct evidence that they performed extractions or surgeries, but the presence of dental appliances suggests that oral health was actively managed, and not purely for medical reasons. Like their elaborate tombs and intricate jewelry, Etruscan dental work reveals a people deeply invested in presentation, legacy, and dignity, even in death. Some of these dental bridges remained in place after burial, suggesting they were worn in life and carried into the afterlife, a sign of how intimately dental care was tied to identity. In a world without dentures or implants, the Etruscans' gold-bound bridges were a mark of innovation and elegance, a gleaming smile from a civilization ahead of its time. By the time the Roman Empire rose to power, dentistry had evolved into a mix of practical treatments, surgical experimentation, and questionable cosmetics. The Romans didn't just inherit medical knowledge from the Etruscans and Greeks. They expanded it, codified it, and added their own uniquely Roman flair. Think of it as ancient dental care, with a touch of militarized efficiency and vinegar rinse. One of the most famous Roman medical writers was Cornelius Celsus, described dental procedures in his medical encyclopedia De Medicina. He noted techniques for extracting teeth, treating toothaches, and even cleaning the mouth with abrasive powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. Some recipes included urine, which sounds horrifying today, but actually provided a natural source of ammonia, a potent cleaning agent. Yes, Romans used urine as mouthwash. Bottled and imported from provinces like Portugal and Gaul, it was prized for its whitening effect on teeth. Elite Romans seeking bright smiles may have suffered through daily gargles of fermented ammonia, followed by a rinse of wine or vinegar to freshen the breath. Vanity, it seems, can override disgust. Beyond that, Roman physicians used forceps scalpels and dental elevators for extractions and oral surgeries. Metal tools have been found in excavation sites alongside surgical kits, showing that dentistry, while painful, was not uncommon. Soldiers in particular received treatment for broken or abscessed teeth, as oral health was considered vital to combat readiness. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to early prosthetics inspired by Etruscan designs. These included bridges secured with gold wire and replacement teeth made from ivory or bone. Like their predecessors, Romans saw teeth as status symbols. A full white smile was associated with beauty, power, and good breeding, especially in the public arenas of the forum or the saths. Even the philosopher Pliny the Elder chimed in, recommending remedies like burnt mouse ash for toothaches or chewing mint for bad breath. His works, while eccentric, reflect how deeply oral health was woven into everyday Roman life. In the end, Roman dentistry was as advanced as it was brutal. painful, certainly effective occasionally. But for an empire obsessed with control, hygiene, and appearance, taking care of one's teeth was a Roman duty, no matter how strange the methods. While ancient Mediterranean civilizations were using gold wire and crushed bones to clean their teeth, the Mer of Mesoamerica were turning dentistry into a literal art form. For the Maya, dental modification wasn't just about health. It was about status identity and spiritual symbolism. They didn't just fix teeth. They adorned them, carved them, and embedded them with precious stones, all without modern anesthesia. Archaeological findings from sites in present-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras have revealed skulls with intricate dental work dating back over 1,000 years. Many Mayan elites had inlays of jade, turquoise, hematite, or obsidian fitted into their front teeth, not after death, but while they were alive. The inlays were carefully set into small, perfectly drilled holes in the enamel using primitive rotary tools tipped with obsidian or other sharp stones. It's believed they used water-powdered quartz or even plant resins as lubricants and adhesives to keep the gems in place. The precision of these modifications is astounding. The drilled holes are so symmetrical and clean that researchers believe the Mir had a deep understanding of dental anatomy, even if they didn't frame it in medical terms. And remarkably, there's minimal evidence of nerve damage or infection, suggesting these procedures were not only common but successfully executed. But why did they do it? The answer lies in cultural meaning. For the Maya, the mouth was a powerful symbol, the place where breath and speech emerged, both considered sacred. Modifying teeth was a way to honor the gods, signal elite status, or align oneself with cosmic forces. Jade, for example, was associated with life, fertility, and divine favor. A ruler with jade inlaid teeth wasn't just showing off. They were embodying sacred authority. The mayor also practiced tooth filing, reshaping canines and incisors into points not unlike vampire fangs or symbolic glyphs. In some cases, the designs mimicked animal forms, likely invoking spiritual protection or transformation. And while some dental work served ceremonial purposes, evidence suggests others were functional repairs, like filled cavities or drilled abscesses. So the Mer weren't just performing ritual art. They were also treating real dental problems centuries before European dentistry had caught up. To the Mer, dentistry was a fusion of medicine, magic, and aesthetics, a worldview drilled into every glittering smile. In ancient China, dentistry wasn't a separate science. It was deeply integrated into the broader philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. Rather than isolating the mouth as a separate unit, Chinese physicians believed that oral health reflected the health of the entire body. A sore tooth wasn't just a dental issue. It was a sign of internal imbalance in the organs, particularly the stomach and kidneys. And while they didn't use drills or bridges like other civilizations, the Chinese developed a sophisticated system of preventive and herbal dentistry that spanned centuries. As early as 3000 BCE, writings in texts like the Hanged Ning, the Yellow Emperors, in a canon, made mention of dental issues. Ancient practitioners mapped meridians, energy channels that connected the teeth to specific organs. For example, pain in a lower MR issues in the bladder or stomach. Rather than attacking the symptom, Chinese medicine sought to restore balance through diet, acupuncture, and herbal treatments. To keep teeth healthy, daily oral hygiene was emphasized. people chewed fragrant twigs from aromatic trees like willow and miswak to clean their teeth, similar to toothbrushes. They also used saltwater rinses, crushed herbs, and even powdered bone to scrub away buildup. Tooth powders often included cloves, mint, rhubarb, root cinnamon, and ginseng, all aimed at freshening breath, reducing inflammation, and strengthening gums. Toothaches were treated using acupuncture, specifically targeting points along the jaw, neck, and even hands to relieve pain and stimulate healing. This non-invasive approach was often paired with picuses, mixtures of ground herbs applied directly to the gum or cheek to draw out infection or reduce swelling. Interestingly, ancient Chinese texts also reference tooth regeneration techniques using mineral pasts or spiritual rituals involving dragon bones. Fossilized animal bones believed to carry potent key life energy. These bones were ground into powders and sometimes mixed with wine or herbs to create a kind of early medicinal paste. There is limited evidence of surgical intervention or tooth extraction in early Chinese civilization, but that may reflect the cultural emphasis on preservation and balance rather than invasive correction. In many ways, their focus on prevention, clean diets, consistent hygiene, and body-wide balance mirrors some of the best practices of modern holistic dentistry. For the ancient Chinese, the path to a healthy mouth began not in the mouth, but in the harmony of the entire body. In ancient India, oral health wasn't treated in isolation. It was considered a vital part of the body's overall balance and energy flow. Rooted in the ancient medical system known as Ayurveda, dating back over 3,000 years, Vedic texts like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain detailed observations on dental care, tooth diseases, and remedies, some of which are surprisingly aligned with modern understanding. The Ayurvedic approach to dentistry emphasized prevention, purification, and daily rituals. One of the most enduring practices was dantavana, or daily tooth cleaning using herbal chewing sticks. These sticks came from specific trees like neem licorice or babul, all of which have antibacterial properties. People would chew on one end until it frayed, then use it to brush their teeth. This practice still exists in parts of rural India today, but oral care didn't stop there. Ayurveda also advocated oil pulling known as kavala or gandia, where oil, usually sesame or coconut, was swished in the mouth for several minutes. This wasn't just a hygiene ritual. It was believed to pull toxins from the body and strengthen teeth, gums, and jaw. Modern studies have found that oil pulling may actually reduce harmful bacteria and improve gum health, giving ancient wisdom some scientific credibility. The Sushruta Samhita, attributed to the surgeon Sushruta around 600 BCE CE, contains chapters specifically on tooth extraction, jaw fractures, and oral ulcers. Sushruta described surgical instruments for removing damaged teeth and draining abscesses using iron tools and herbal pastes to disinfect the area. He also recommended cauterization, burning the infected area with a heated tool for severe cases of decay or gum disease. Painful, yes, but methodical. Ayurveda classified dental diseases into categories like danta harasha, tooth sensitivity, dant shakura, tartar buildup, and dantovesta, gum inflammation. Treatments were tailored according to a person's dosha, their body constitution, varta, pitta, or kapha, and could involve dietary changes, herbal rinses, and even meditation to reduce stress-related grinding or jaw tension. For the ancient Indians, the mouth was a sacred gateway. a channel through which speech, nourishment, and breath all passed. To keep it clean, healthy, and balanced was not just a health decision. It was a spiritual obligation. In Ayurveda, dentistry wasn't just a branch of medicine. It was a daily act of alignment between body, mind, and spirit. In the ancient Greek world, medicine and dentistry were deeply influenced by philosophy, observation, and early anatomy. Unlike some civilizations that saw disease as purely spiritual, the Greeks, especially from the classical period onward, sought rational explanations for pain and decay, including dental issues. And while they didn't have dentists in the modern sense, their physicians practiced surprisingly advanced oral care for their time. Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and Aristotle wrote about teeth in medical and anatomical terms. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, described the structure and eruption of teeth, causes of tooth decay, and even methods of extraction. He believed that imbalances in the body's four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, could lead to dental disease, especially gum infections and tooth pain. For the Greeks, diet played a central role in oral health. Physicians warned that soft, sticky, or overly sweet foods could cause decay. Instead, crunchy foods like apples, grains, and legumes were encouraged for scraping residue off teeth. There's also mention of chewing mastic gum, a resin from the mastic tree, to freshen breath and clean the mouth, a practice still popular in the Mediterranean today. When problems did occur, Greek physicians employed treatments that ranged from herbal remedies and pyces to rudimentary surgical procedures. Tooth extractions were done using metal forceps, often without anesthesia. The pain was intense, but sometimes relieved with herbal sedatives like opium poppy mandre or henbane. For abscesses, physicians used lancing techniques to release infection, often followed by salt or wine rinses for disinfection. Aristotle took a particularly detailed interest in teeth, even noting that men and women had different numbers of meres, which turned out to be incorrect, but demonstrated his effort to systematize human anatomy. The Greeks also documented rare dental conditions, such as teeth erupting later in life, or even congenital toothlessness. Dentistry was not considered a separate field, but part of general medical training. Physicians treated everything from ulcers to fractures, and teeth were just another part of the body to be studied and healed. In essence, ancient Greek dentistry was a fusion of science, observation, and pain tolerance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in the belief that the body, even its teeth, could be understood, predicted, and corrected through logic and learning. Across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, ancient dentistry evolved not as a single linear science, but as a global tapestry of innovation, ritual, and resilience. From flint drills in prehistoric Pakistan to gold bridges in Etruria. From jade-inlaid Mayan mares to Ayurvedic oil pulling, early societies approached dental care with a mix of bravery, ingenuity, and sheer necessity. Though their tools were primitive and pain management often non-existent, ancient cultures made surprisingly sophisticated advances. They didn't have bacteria theory or X-rays, but they understood that rotting teeth caused suffering, and they did what they could to intervene. Whether by drilling out decay using herbs to numb the pain or crafting prosthetics to preserve appearance, these early dentists or healers, priests and artisans moonlighting as such, laid the foundation of a medical art that would eventually become a modern profession. More striking still is how interdisciplinary ancient dentistry was. It wasn't just medical, it was spiritual, cosmetic, philosophical, and even political. In some cultures, a bright gemstone-studded smile conveyed divine favor or social status. In others, missing or misshapen teeth were tied to personal imbalance, or even considered omens from the gods. Oral health, it turns out, was never just about chewing. The tools left behind, obsidian blades, copper probes, gold ligatures, herbal scrolls, are fragments of a story that stretches across continents. They prove that ancient people, often thought of as primitive or superstitious, were curious problem solvers. They watched, they experimented, and they passed down what worked. And many of their practices endure. We still floss, rinse, and brush. We use herbal ingredients like clove mint and myrrh. Some even continue ancient customs like oil pulling or chewing neem sticks. Not because they're nostalgic, but because they work. Modern dentistry, with its implants, lasers, and 3D imaging, may seem worlds apart from stone drills and mouse skull Pegasus. But the goal remains the same: relieve pain, preserve teeth, and improve lives.